In the quiet of Windsor, where the gates close with the weight of centuries, a contradiction begins to form. Prince Andrew, once surrounded by the symbols of assured privilege, now stands as a reminder that status alone cannot guarantee stability. His life, shaped by ceremony and inherited expectation, presents a paradox. A prince whose title suggested permanence, yet whose finances revealed a fragile foundation beneath the surface. For years, Andrew moved through royal life with the confidence of someone protected by tradition. His uniform, his military record, and the ceremonial duties of the Queen's second son created an image of discipline and continuity. To the public eye, he belonged to a realm where resources were assumed, where royal life appeared insulated from the ordinary pressures faced beyond palace walls. But behind that polished facade lay a quieter arithmetic. Reports suggest that his personal income, though comfortable, was never sufficient to match the lifestyle orbiting around him. The expectations attached to his status, the residences, the staff, the engagements, often exceeded what his private means could realistically sustain. The sums, kept discreet for decades, did not always align. As public scrutiny evolved and transparency became a measure of modern accountability, the gap between image and reality grew harder to conceal. What once seemed immovable began to look uncertain. And so the contradiction emerges. A man raised in abundance now confronting the limits of privilege, exposed not by dramatic scandal alone, but by the quiet ledger of a life lived beyond its means. A life where the numbers at last demanded attention. In the early chapters of Prince Andrew's life, the monarchy found in him a figure who embodied a reassuring simplicity. He was the young officer returning from service, the confident son of a reigning queen, the embodiment of duty at a time when tradition still carried unquestioned authority. His naval career provided him with structure and purpose, lending his public role a clarity that suited the expectations of the era. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Andrew's presence within the institution appeared steady and assured. He attended ceremonial events with ease, stepped into foreign tours on behalf of the Crown, and performed the engagements expected of a working royal. He represented the monarchy at openings, commemorations, and diplomatic functions, becoming one of the family's visible faces during a period of significant public interest. To many observers, he seemed to fit naturally into the ceremonial machinery of the royal family. The lifestyle surrounding him reflected this image. Residences were maintained according to long-standing arrangements. Staff and travel were supported by the institution, as they were for other working royals. His role implied a level of stability and financial certainty that few questioned. The assumption was simple and rarely challenged. A prince would have access to the means expected of his position. Yet beneath this reassuring facade lay a financial reality more constrained than it appeared. Andrew's official income as a working royal, while comfortable by ordinary standards, was limited compared to the lifestyle expectations associated with his status. The grandeur that surrounded him, the palaces, the ceremonies, the traditions, belonged to the crown, not the individual. The day-to-day costs of private life were often his own responsibility. As the monarchy began to modernise, expectations shifted. Public interest in spending grew sharper. Scrutiny increased around funding, roles, and relevance. In this evolving landscape, the assumptions that had once protected Andrew's image became less sustainable. The gap between public perception and private capacity widened, gradually revealing a vulnerability concealed by years of ceremonial routine. What remained was an image built on inherited symbolism, quietly diverging from the financial realities that supported it. The portrait of a prince who looked entirely at ease in his world began to show the first signs of tension, a hint that the structure beneath was not as secure as the titles suggested. It is here, in this mixture of certainty and strain, that his later contradictions found their earliest roots. By the early 2000s, the ease that once defined Prince Andrew's public life began to soften. His transition away from full-time military service, the environment that had provided him with structure, identity, and institutional clarity, introduced a new set of expectations. His evolving trade-related roles, though significant in their intent, did not carry the same clear boundaries or support systems as his military career. The result was a landscape where responsibilities blurred and financial demands became more complex. Maintaining the lifestyle associated with a senior royal required a delicate balance. Security, travel, property upkeep, and staff arrangements sat in a space neither entirely public nor entirely private. Some costs were borne by tradition. Others relied on personal resources. Many existed in a grey area shaped by historical precedent rather than modern clarity. Observers later noted how this ambiguity created pressure points that were manageable only while public roles remained steady. As funding scrutiny across the monarchy tightened in the early 21st century, Andrew's private arrangements became more strained. Reports indicate that he increasingly relied on external assistance to maintain certain commitments. Gifts, loans, and financial support from long-standing acquaintances occasionally filled gaps, though these transactions would only draw broader attention years later. Each instance, taken alone, seemed unremarkable within a world where connections and patronage were interwoven. Together, however, they formed a pattern that would prove difficult to align with rising expectations of transparency. Royal Lodge, the Windsor residence he shared with Sarah Ferguson, became a central symbol of this hidden decline. A grand property with significant upkeep, it represented stability to the Duke of York, but also highlighted the financial contradiction at the heart of his private life. Maintaining such an estate demanded resources that exceeded his personal income, leaving Andrew increasingly dependent on arrangements that were never designed for modern public scrutiny. Alongside these financial pressures came a series of judgment calls, friendships, ventures, and associations that gradually undermined confidence. None alone defined his trajectory, but together they signalled a drift away from the steady assurance that once characterised his public identity. Decisions made quietly, often years earlier, would later cast long shadows over his reputation. The decline was not theatrical, it unfolded slowly, almost silently, across conversations, arrangements, and choices. It occurred in the blurred spaces between private obligation and public expectation. And it eroded the foundation beneath the image he had cultivated throughout his adult life. By the time wider scrutiny arrived, the landscape around him had already shifted. The financial pressures were no longer temporary challenges, but structural realities. The outcome of years in which appearance had outpaced means. What emerged was not sudden collapse, but the gradual hidden weakening of a life built on assumptions that no longer held. The turning point in Prince Andrew's public life did not arrive with a single incident, yet it felt abrupt when it finally came into view. Years of quiet concern, overlooked decisions, and financial contradictions converged at a moment when scrutiny was already gathering around him. What had once been distant unease crystallised into a defining rupture. International attention intensified as questions about Andrew's judgment and associations entered the global conversation. Public confidence, previously steady despite murmurs, shifted quickly. The atmosphere surrounding him changed from curiosity to concern, then to something far more consequential. A crisis of credibility at the heart of a modern monarchy expected to uphold clarity and accountability. The television interview, intended as an opportunity for explanation, became the centrepiece of this shift. The setting was calm, the intent seemingly transparent, yet the tone of the conversation appeared at odds with the gravity of the moment. Viewers noted the dissonance between the subject matter and the responses offered. Instead of closing the gap between the prince and the public, the interview deepened it. In its aftermath, the consequences unfolded rapidly. The institution, sensitive to public sentiment and mindful of the expectations facing a new generation of royal leadership, responded decisively. Andrew stepped back from public duties. Patronages were returned or reassigned. His formal position within the working structure of the monarchy contracted dramatically. The distance that followed was both institutional and personal. Financial questions, once background considerations, moved sharply into focus. Without the framework of official engagements, the sustainability of his lifestyle, including the upkeep of Royal Lodge and the arrangements surrounding it, became a subject of renewed interest. The contradiction between private means and royal surroundings was no longer obscured by public roles. This moment also altered Andrew's place within his own family. King Charles III, navigating the transition to a streamlined monarchy, faced the responsibility of balancing familial loyalty with institutional stability. For the Duke of York, the shift marked a profound personal recalibration, a transition from long-standing public presence to a life lived largely away from the spotlight. The rupture was not purely reputational. It redefined his relationship with an institution built on continuity, symbolism, and public trust. A line was drawn between before and after, leaving the prince on the quieter side of a history that had moved forward without him. What remained was a life irrevocably changed, not solely by scrutiny, but by the collision between expectation, reality, and a moment that made the hidden pressures impossible to ignore. In the years since Prince Andrew stepped away from public duties, His life has settled into a quieter, more confined rhythm. Where he once occupied a visible position within the fabric of royal service, he now exists on the institution's periphery, present, but no longer participating. The shift is neither theatrical nor abrupt. It is a steady redefinition of role, responsibility, and relevance. Royal Lodge remains the centre of his daily existence. The sweeping estate, once a backdrop to family moments and formal receptions, has taken on a different character. It is both a refuge and a question, a symbol of the privileges he retains, yet also a reminder of the unresolved financial considerations that have long surrounded it. Its closed gates and quiet grounds mirror the narrowing of his public world. Within the royal family, dynamics have adjusted with cautious sensitivity. King Charles III continues to emphasise a streamlined monarchy, guided by the principles of focus and accountability. In this vision, Andrew's position is necessarily limited. His role is neither rehabilitated nor actively removed. It simply no longer carries a place in the institution's forward-facing purpose. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, maintain a dignified balance. Their affection for their father is clear, yet they navigate their own paths with careful distinction from the controversy that reshaped his trajectory. They appear as supportive figures without allowing their identities to be absorbed by his circumstances. Their presence reflects both loyalty and independence. Sarah Ferguson, whose connection to Andrew has endured through decades of change, remains a constant figure at Royal Lodge. Her presence is familiar, rooted in history and shared life. Yet even this companionship cannot offset the wider reality. Andrew's sphere of influence has contracted significantly. The engagements, public roles, and institutional duties that once shaped his routine have given way to a life defined by privacy and restriction. What remains is a prince living within view of privilege, but far from its practical expression. His days are marked by routine rather than responsibility, by domestic quiet rather than ceremonial expectation. The institution around him moves with deliberate caution, aware that visibility carries weight, and that public sentiment shapes the landscape in which the monarchy must operate. There is no formal conclusion to Andrew's story, only an ongoing chapter defined by distance, containment, and the uncertainty of what his future within the royal framework can reasonably hold. In the end, Prince Andrew's financial story reveals something larger than the circumstances of one individual. It reflects a shift within the monarchy itself, an institution once shielded by tradition, now increasingly shaped by the expectations of public accountability. The world in which Andrew's lifestyle was formed no longer exists in the way it once did, and the assumptions that supported it have lost much of their power. His difficulties were not defined solely by personal choices, though those choices undeniably influenced the outcome. They were also shaped by a changing era, a time when inherited privilege faced new questions, when transparency became a measure of credibility, and when public roles required not only symbolism, but clarity of purpose. The distance between image and reality, once bridged by ceremony, became visible in a way the institution could no longer overlook. Andrew's journey illustrates the delicate balance between tradition and adaptation. It highlights the challenge of navigating a life built on inherited structure while living in a society that demands individual accountability. And it shows how quickly the foundations of status can shift when the forces around it evolve. The story is not one of judgment, but of consequence. Decisions accumulated over years, financial pressures quietly intensified, and the structures that once upheld his role proved insufficient when exposed to modern scrutiny. The result is a life reshaped, not by a single event, but by a gradual convergence of expectation, reality, and institutional change. As the monarchy continues to define its place in the 21st century, Andrew's path serves as a contemplative marker, a reminder that privilege, without alignment to purpose and transparency, carries limits, and that the cost of maintaining an image, when unsupported by means, eventually becomes unsustainable. What remains is a quieter life, removed from public duty, yet still tethered to the legacy of a family whose future will move on without him. A life that invites reflection on the changing nature of responsibility, the boundaries of inherited roles, and the evolving landscape of an ancient institution learning to meet the demands of a different age.